should switch their microphones and cameras off until the chair brings you into the meeting. Those observing today's proceedings should have their cameras and microphones switched off at all times. If members wish to speak, please press the raise your hand icon on the Teams toolbar, but remember to switch it off after the chair brings you in. Lucy will now start the recording and I will undertake a roll call to identify those in attendance. So, Chair, we've got Councillor Sandra MacDonald, you're in attendance.
Hello there.
Vice Chair, Councillor Peter Argyle.
Yes, I'm here, Mark. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Vice Chair, Dr. Maggie Buckle.
Yeah.
Councillor David Aitchison.
Present.
Councillor Philip Bell.
Yes, good afternoon.
Councillor George Carr.
Afternoon, Mark here.
Thank you. Councillor John Cox.
Good afternoon.
Councillor Michael Hutchison. No. We've got an apology for Councillor Avril Mackenzie. Colin Allenach.
Yep, here.
George Donald has indicated you'll be late to the meeting. He's got another appointment. And then Mr. Ian Ross. Not in attendance as yet. I'll keep an eye out for those who haven't appeared, just in case they do turn up a bit later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. And do we have any declarations of interest from those at the meeting at the moment? Not seeing any raised hands or indication of declarations of interest, so I think we'll just move on to the first item on our agenda, which is budget matters. So if I could ask Moira to, oh no, we've got the minutes. Yes, absolutely, thank you. The minute of the board meeting on the 8th of December, members. Anything anybody would like to raise on that, or can we agree that as a correct minute? I see nodding heads there. That's good. Thank you. So now we'll go on to budget matters. And if I could ask Moira to introduce the paper at 3.1. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Excuse me. Good afternoon, all. The report before you covers the period April 21 to January 2022. Expenditure to January is 1.877 million against a budget of 9.7 million. This is detailed in Appendix 1. This information is before variants and carry forwards, which will be discussed later. Appendix 2 details the proposed variants for the remaining part of 20, 21 and 22, which needed to be approved. A number of projects within the 21-22 budget will not be delivered in this financial year due to several reasons as explained within the report. Appendix 3 details the funding to be carried forward into 22-23 to the sum of 2.254 million. Grant funding usually comes with specific deadlines. We are fortunate in that the Local Rail Development Fund grant deadline has been extended to June 22, giving additional time to be able to claim any outstanding amounts. Sustrans has agreed a modification of the grant funding, and confirmation of the amount of the final grant will be provided at a future board meeting. Every effort is being made to ensure that the Regional Transport Partnership Active Travel Grant is invoiced and claimed before the end of the financial year in March. As previously reported, 3.2 million for Contour Station is still to be invoiced from Transport Scotland, and this is expected to be paid in this financial year. Chair, there are 5 recommendations for the board to approve. 1. Note the monitoring position and forecast presented in Appendix 1. 2. Approve the variants set out in Appendix 2. 3. Approve the continuation of funding to next financial year to complete approved projects presented in Appendix 3. 4. Note the updates on projects for which Nestrans will receive external grant funding and timescales for claiming each grant. And 5. The strategic transport position. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. And can I open up any questions or comments that members would like to make on what we have in front of us? Welcome, Ian. I see you've joined us now.
Thank you, Chair.
I'm not seeing any hands. Can I ask on Appendix 1, under the regional transport strategy, we have rechargeable costs that we didn't have in the budget, but we have now. If I could just get assurance on what those are, please.
Chair, could I ask Jenny if she would be able to? Thank you, Jenny. Thank you.
Yes,
Thanks,
yes.
Jenny.
There's a number of projects that we recharge to City Region deal, the Assam model that's been constructed. So Nestrans commissioned the work, so we are invoiced that money, but then we recharge it on, so there's no net cost to Nestrans. So that's those rechargeable elements. So there's the Assam model rebuild. There's some live lab work as well.
Excellent, thanks for that. Councillor Carr, George, you've got a question?
Thanks, Andrea. Yeah, it was just a wee question on EV charging points. I noticed we've got one or two of those. Where does the balance lie between council supplying those and Nestrans? Because we seem to be getting an increased request, by communities for delivering these all over, and obviously there's a strategic element to this as well as to where we actually have them. So maybe somebody could comment just on where the liability for this lies and where we should be going with this, because it's something that seems to be increasing up the level of correspondence to councillors. Thanks.
Thanks, George. Jenny.
The one that's included within the Nestrans budget was requested by Aberdeenshire Council. They had a number of EV chargers that they were replacing this year using funding, but with costs going up, I think just supply and demand, it's only the increase in cost that is included within this year's budget for Nestrans. So it was a planned site that once they got their quotes, they couldn't afford them all with available funding. So it's an EV charger in Balmeedy that's been funded. When we get on to the next item, there is allocations for Nestrans that have been requested from Aberdeenshire Council to assist with implementing more EV chargers, but that wasn't a request from Aberdeen City Council.
Okay, so just to come back, sure. So it's really a joint process, this, for putting these in place. Nestrans and the various councils have a role to play in how we roll these out.
I think the councils have received government monies, but because it wasn't sufficient for the sites that they'd planned, Nestrans has been asked to help support this year.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, thanks, Jenny.
Councillor Bell.
Thank you, Chair. So I actually, the question from Councillor Carr there actually prompted me. What element of monies get included? So when we actually buy chargers, 1, 10, whatever, what element of maintenance money is included in that charge? And the reason I say that is because Siemens are actually installing a lot of these chargers around the city, and in a location called Dunmel Manor, in the car park there, 2 of them were damaged, and that was just ordinary motor cars reversing into them. And that's actually caused us quite a lot of grief to find budget to actually fix them. But in terms of general maintenance, though, how is that normally included within a contract for buying chargers?
It's the councils that have been procuring these sites, and Nestrans' budget that we're supplying is purely towards the capital cost. Nestrans don't commit any revenue support for maintenance, although that doesn't avoid the council's request and support from us in budget for it. But the current contributions in this year's budget is purely for the purchase and installation costs.
I could maybe perhaps bring in David Dunn here with a rather nice background. I see that you've got there, David. Perhaps you could answer Councillor Bell's or give a little bit more information.
I probably can, Chair, thanks, and apologies for the background, but I've just come from a webinar on our net zero plan, so hence the rather OTT background. Councillor Bell, really good question. So the way, and I speak for the city, but it probably applies to the Shire in some respects as well. The money that we get from Transport Scotland for any EV charging points to date, or from Scottish Government to date, it covers the installation, and it does also cover the maintenance, as in they, Transport Scotland will deal with the maintenance of them where they get damaged. Fundamentally, though, the longer term, they will get handed over to the council and they will become the council's responsibility. Now, I think going back to Councillor Carr's question, though, there's a wider question here, which is what role do councils or Nestrans have in effectively becoming fueling stations, EV fueling stations? I think in the short term, we definitely have a role, because we've got to sort of pump prime the market, if you want to call it that. But for example, I've had 3 separate meetings with, I'm going to say multinational energy companies who are very keen to get into this space. The challenge that they have is partly the challenge that you've identified, Councillor Bell, in terms of where is the return. So historically, you'll probably be aware that in the city we didn't charge for EV charging. We charged for parking in that space, but we didn't charge for the actual power. We changed that a couple of years ago in the budget, just simply because the demand on that charging just surpassed what we had in the budget on an ongoing basis. But the charge is only basically to cover the cost of the electricity and the cost of the administration, not the cost of the long-term maintenance. And that's a piece of work that we have ongoing to look at how we do that going forward.
Thanks very much. Does that answer your question, Councillor Bell?
It does, and it opens several more questions. But yes, thank you. Answer that question.
I don't see any other. Oh, yep, got another hand up, perhaps. I'm not sure if that's still whose that is.
Councillor Cox, Chair.
Yep, it is.
Thank you. Councillor Cox.
Yeah, I hope it's the right question to ask. Page 15, there's reference to 947 in the funding environment. It's coming from the levelling up. Is that funding being secured? I wasn't aware of, I know it was a project that was being put forward, but I wasn't aware that funds were secure on that.
Who would like to take that question? And Ewan, thank you.
I'm happy to come in, Chair. So the reference to that levelling up fund is the funds that were granted to Aberdeenshire to undertake feasibility and study work. So they've been utilised to take forward some of the outstanding business case development for the various projects along the corridor, Councillor. So it's not the very large number that we might potentially be bidding for at a later date. It's a smaller revenue amount that allows us to go and do the study work.
That's fine. That's good. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So in terms of recommendations, members, we have 5 in front of us, 3 to note and 2 to approve. The approving ones are the environments at Appendix 2 and the continuation of funding for the next financial year at Appendix 3. Can we agree those recommendations, please? Thanks very much. Okay, if we go on to item 3.2 then, Jenny, if you'd like to take us through the budget proposals and, of course, a new way of looking at our budgets with a new 3-year indicative plan. So very welcome to see that. It's something that I think all of us would commend. So over to you.
Thank you, Chair. This report asks the board to approve budgets for next financial year, subject of course to our anticipated funding levels being confirmed, and the board is also asked to approve the new proposed 3-year programme of works as a basis for future year annual budgets. The budget proposals for next financial year have been prepared on the basis that funding levels from both councils and the Scottish Government will be continued at current levels, but the proposed budgets might require further amendment by the board when the actual allocations are confirmed, which will be once the councils have set their own budgets in March and once an offer of grant has been received from the Scottish Government. The report also notes that suggestions have been submitted to the Scottish Government for consideration for their active travel grants to regional transport partnerships, and the details of any offer that is received would be reported to a future board. Nestrans has worked with officers from both councils to develop the budget proposals, and consideration was given a number of criteria such as outcomes from studies, likelihood of projects being delivered within the year ahead, opportunities to maximise other funding sources, building on previous year's spend, and of course the overall fit with the new regional transport strategy. The proposed coordination and project development budget is presented in Appendix 1 and totals just over 1.3 million. It covers the running cost of Nestrans, along with non-core costs that are presented under the headings of the action plans that were developed to support delivery of the previous strategy, and also some of the headings for actions and priorities within the newly adopted strategy. The proposed strategic investment programme for next year is presented in Appendix 2. As mentioned, it anticipates that council allocations will be retained at the previous year's levels to give funding next year of 2.467 million. It also shows the funding from the current financial year that members have just approved in the previous budget report for continuation into 22-23, along with the Local Rail Development Fund grant that was mentioned can continue to be claimed until the end of June, and the Sustrans funding that's associated with active travel development officer post. Should this all be agreed, it would bring the total available next year to just over 4.8 million, and details on the individual proposed projects are given in Appendix 2, and a summary of the spend against the various themes within the RTS is given in the covering report. And now the regional transport partnerships can hold a general fund reserve, a 3-year plan covering the period up to the end of 24-25 was prepared and is presented in Appendix 3, with a summary again in the covering report. This also assumes continuation of funding from the councils at the same levels as in recent years, but it can't be an agreed spending plan as it will be subject to future budget agreements, but hopefully it indicates the potential profiling of expenditure and shows a general programme of works that can be considered as a basis for preparing annual budgets up to 2025. So the board has been asked to approve the coordination and project development budget and the strategic investment programme for next financial year as detailed in Appendices 1 and 2, subject to the anticipated funding levels being confirmed and making any adjustments following the board's consideration. To note the potential for additional funding for active travel schemes through the Scottish Government RTP Active Travel Grant, and to approve the general 3-year programme of works detailed in Appendix 3 as a basis for future year annual budgets. And I'm happy to try and answer any questions on this report. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Jenny, and good to hear that there has been that level of collaboration. I think that makes it work here in the Northeast, where the two councils and the regional transport partnership knock their heads together to see what is aspirational, but also what is deliverable. So have I got any questions from members of the board on any aspects of the report that Jenny has outlined? Colin?
Sorry, just a quickie. Just a bit of understanding for me, and the active travel budget, so it's over 2 million 22-23, and then drops to 1.34 and then to 1.2. With the difference in that, are we happy that we can actually deliver all those things in a over 2 million pound budget and that? And what was it compared to other years, probably before pandemic would be a better bias of where we're looking?
I mean, the 2 million next year, as you can see on page 22, the majority of that has been carried over from this financial year. So yes, it is a lot for delivery next year, but it is also a large proportion of our available budget. We get 2.7 million per annum from the council, so it is a high proportion.
Sure. I'm just just concerned if we are
having to roll more over from the last year? Are we just going to continually roll over, or are we actually going to manage to finish it next year? That was my only concern on that.
We have been impacted by COVID. There is also an element in the carry forward where I think the councils were given larger cycle and walk and safer streets external budgets that they've tried to maximise that would have been lost this year. So the Nestrans Board was asked to carry forward our money so that it wouldn't be lost. So yeah, hopefully we can maybe deliver more next year if it's not fully required to fund some of these projects that have been funded through external sources.
Okay, thanks Jenny, thank you for that.
No pressure, Colin. You'll need to make sure that this is goes through. I think, you know, there have been various reasons as is in the report and as Jenny has outlined, but I think you know, as we come out of the pandemic, I think there will be a renewed will to deliver, particularly on active travel. It is where things are happening at the moment. So let's hope and make that happen in the year to come, I think. Anyone else want to come in on this report? Nope, not seeing anyone. So thanks very much, Jenny. Can we then, on page 23, members, approve the budgets as outlined in Appendices 1 and 2, subject, of course, to funding levels. Note the potential for additional funding and approve the general 3-year programme as outlined in Appendix 3.
Agreed.
That's fine. Thank you very much, members. If we could then move on to our director's report. Rab, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, members. Just a quick progress report and update really under the director's report with a number of matters for noting. You can see there a list of meetings, involvement, liaison that we've had since the last board meeting, and maybe a couple that I would like to draw to members' attention, if I may. Progress in particular on Net Zero Aberdeen work, and we intend bringing a report on that to the next meeting of the board, as shown by David's backdrop on his camera earlier in the meeting. Paul attended on our behalf a meeting with the Union Connectivity Group, and there's an update there regarding the work that's been taken forward by the UK government. And in particular, I wanted to draw to your attention a meeting with the Aberdeen to Central Belt Railway Improvements Stakeholders Group, and to say that there is progress on that project, and I think we have guarantees that they are moving towards a solution that can be in place to achieve the promised time savings and improved resilience that we were offered as part of the scheme in support of the City Region deal. It's not in the report, but I wanted also to draw members' attention to the fact that since the last meeting, we have had a change of Transport Minister. Graham Day stood down, I think towards the end of January, and has been replaced by Ms. Gilruth, who I think was at the same school as Maggie. She's from Fife, and we haven't met with her yet, but I think it would be hopeful that we would get early meetings with the regional transport partners with the new minister, but I just wanted to draw that to members' attention as well. So the report's there for noting, but happy to take any questions, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks, Rab. And just to add, in the future programme of meetings, that the RPT Chairs meeting on the 2nd of March is going to have an hour with Patrick Harvey around active travel. So that'll be welcome to see what he has to say about how that all works. Philip.
Thanks, Chair. Right, thank you. You get about, don't you? You attend lots of meetings and do lots of stuff. Can I ask you two questions? One of them is the carbon impact tool I read about. What does that actually entail, please?
Thanks, Councillor Bell. I'm not 100% sure, if I'm honest. There is a tool being developed by the Seven Cities Alliance, as I understand it, being led by Edinburgh. But I think the feeling was that the last thing we wanted was 32 local authorities going off and developing their own tools and each paying highly paid consultants to develop a methodology. And there was a feeling that actually that methodology needs to be consistent, particularly between the city authorities. And Edinburgh and the Seven Cities Alliance have been sharing that to make sure there is consistency around the work. It's something that's being led by, I think, Sinclair Lang in the City Council's environment team.
Thanks, because the reason I ask really is because Civitas Portis were developing a carbon impact tool, and it was going to allow people who rock up, for instance, in the New South Harbour, to just to work out how much carbon they'll be expending to travel all over the place and to get themselves a Wheels car or whatever. And I'm wondering if, you know, if something that we've had funding for several years now could perhaps be rolled into that. It seems a bit of a waste otherwise. The other thing I was going to ask you was this net zero delivery group. There are 6 outlined strategies. I can think of possibly 2. So it relates to hydrogen and wind. 3 EV vehicles. But can you tell me what you understand as the 6 outlined strategies, please?
They're actually on themes, Councillor Bell, rather than specific technologies. So one of them is mobility, which is the one that I'm heavily involved in and leading a small group on that. I'm sure David's going to come in and answer that question, but there are others relating to energy, to housing, and that would lead David on to remind me of the other 3. Thanks, David.
David.
Thanks, Chair. I was going to wait and just see how Rob got on. Yeah, there are 6 themes. So it's mobility, buildings, energy, natural environment, and empowerment are the themes. And somebody is now going to tell me that that's only 5, but I really hope it is 6. And as Rob has explained, they are very much thematic and very high level. So the themes which probably are the easiest to move forward are things like mobility, where we've got a regional transport strategy, we've got local transport strategies, and I think there's already a significant amount of work done in the area. As Rob mentioned, Sinclair Lang is leading on that piece of work with the Scottish Cities Alliance around the carbon assessment tool, and I think Rob has eloquently explained the challenge of every local authority in Scotland going away trying to develop their own tool is just a nonsense. So we are trying to get a more consistent approach in that regard.
And perhaps just to add to that, the improvement service as well was working with councillors and offering carbon literacy training, which dovetailed with what was being said by both Rab and David. I certainly went on that myself, and it was very insightful as to how that works. And as you mentioned, Philip, people actually taking the time to work out what their carbon footprint is, and I think maybe that app will make that easier. So that's good to shine a light on some of that. Thanks. Any other?
Chair, if David did only get to 5, I think the one that was missing was circular economy.
Okay.
Sorry, yes, circular economy.
Excellent. We got there in the end. Thanks. So that's just for noting, members. Are you happy with that? Good stuff. On to 4.2. Again, I think this is for you, Rab, the Regional Transport Strategy Monitoring Report.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, that's one for me. A monitoring framework. I've put together a draft monitoring framework for members to comment on, to input to, and potentially to agree as something that we should publish as a supporting document for the regional transport strategy. The framework is very much based around the 6 priorities that we spoke about probably over a year ago now, and built the regional transport strategy around. And I was very keen that we had indicators to show whether we were actually moving towards achieving these priorities. So 20 indicators have been identified, and for each a general aim, a baseline has been indicated, and then targets where appropriate both to 2030 and to 2040 have been pulled together. So a piece of work there, looking for, as I say, members' comments, input, and discussion as appropriate. But the recommendation is to agree a monitoring report for publication in support of the regional transport strategy. There's also a short update on the ongoing strategic environmental appraisal work, which is ongoing in support of the strategy, and just to let members know that that is ongoing, and we will bring that forward as appropriate. Thank you.
Thanks, Rab. Can I just ask, when we say for publication, I'm assuming that would be virtual, and would you be intending, for example, to push the report out to all elected members in the Northeast and all you know, both at Parliament and at council level, and you know, I'm just trying to get a sense of where this, you know, rather than just putting it on the website and hoping that people pick it up, are we actually actively going to push it out to people?
Yeah, the intention was certainly that it would be an online publication. I should have made that clear. We'll stick it on the website, but yeah, I think if it's felt appropriate, I would be more than happy to circulate a link to it to elected members. As you say, Chair, probably both at council level and at across the wider political spectrum. I think it's also important that we demonstrate to Transport Scotland and officers in central government the work we are doing, because a lot of it relates to, and we'll come on later, to things like the target for reducing traffic and issues around carbon reduction. So I'm very keen that they're aware of it at central government as well as just the local representatives.
Thanks. I mean, I think members, if you have any picky points that you want to take up with Rab, then please feel free to email those to him over the next couple of days. You know, don't leave it too long. But if the, you know, on the bigger picture stuff, I'm not seeing any hands up or any questions around this. If we just look at one, perhaps just for interest, Rab, the one on freight. So on page 48 of the report, one under 1C, effective journey time for goods vehicles, which I thought was, I hadn't seen that framed like that before, and maybe that's just me, but you know, getting from Peterhead to Friarton Bridge, for example, as a baseline for that particular one, and then a target, and then, you know, how we're going to do it and so on. So maybe talk me through how that came about as a not so much the aim, which I get, but you know, was that through consultation with freight people, or how did it come about?
Yeah, it is a little bit anecdotal, if I'm honest, in that the times of journeys are estimated through some apps. So it is one that has been used from sort of Google Apps, and then utilising the fact that obviously lorries don't travel quite as fast as a car. So it has got an amendment to what the Google search time would be for that. And obviously there is an intent that these journeys would be slightly improved going forward. It's taken purely as an example journey from, I guess, one of the furthest points of the region and then linking to the motorway network nationally. So it's, yeah.
And would we be expecting to get any feedback from firms that have lorries, or how will we engage to see if this is this happens over time?
We do have a freight forum which still meets on a regular basis, probably around annually, and there's 3 or 4 of the major freight companies are involved in that. So we could certainly engage with some of these companies, see whether they think that's realistic, whether that would make a difference. For them, often the biggest issue is consistency and reliability of these journey times. But obviously we're looking at an average journey time here.
And I guess lastly, what would be the expectation for these reports to come out? Is it annually, 6 monthly, every 2 years? Just to get a handle on that.
Yeah, most of the data is provided nationally on an annual basis. So I think it would be appropriate to bring forward probably around an annual report. One thing that we had thought about doing, because some of the information comes out in the spring and some comes out in the autumn, was updating as and when information came forward, keeping it almost as a live document online. But I think probably an annual report to the board would be appropriate if members are happy with that, Chair.
Kirsty, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to add in, just if members will remember that we sort of put towards a monitoring framework 1 or 2 boards ago. So just to say that what was approved, if we do an annual monitoring report of these headline RTS indicators on an annual basis, and then we would look to do a 3-yearly evaluation report, which would look a little bit more in depth around about some of the more qualitative information that's maybe out there, taking account of things like studies and other information that maybe not published on quite such a regular basis. But I think an annual review of these key headline indicators and a 3-year evaluation was what was agreed previously. So.
Oh, that's very helpful, because I was just wondering if we should have hardwired that into the recommendations here. But what you're saying is that we've actually agreed previously to do it annually, so that wouldn't particularly be necessary today to do that. So on the recommendations on page 40, then, if we could agree that this report goes for publication, subject perhaps to any small points that members want to take up over the next couple of days with RAB, and then to note the work ongoing around the development of the SEA post-adoption statement. Can we agree to that, members? Excellent. Thank you very much. And then now on to cycling. So we have a report here from our cycling officer, John Barron. Do you want to take us through item 5.1, John, just a bit of an introduction?
Yeah, I can do. Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. Active travel officer, not just cycling officer, just for the notes.
Absolutely, thank you.
Yeah, the first one, some good news stories as ever. The signpost on the quiet cycle routes and covers other things as well. It references ACTRAP. ACTRAP, when it was written, was an extremely important document, and it's very thorough. It remains so. It's safe to say, though, that in the intervening period, it's perhaps became maybe even more important to us all for so many reasons. So I'll come on to it more in the next paper as well, but it remains very important and obviously relevant to us. Within ACTRAP, it mentions the need to develop a strategic network of active travel routes through city and linkages and Shire. The purpose of this paper is to highlight obviously some of the work that is happened and ongoing. And as you'll see with the kind of maps there at the top of page 68, there are the problem with that map that I have, it kind of tends to indicate it's end to end or larger town to larger town, but obviously the strategic link is only as good as perhaps as some of the smaller links from village to community, smaller distances in between there as well. So the big links made up of lots of smaller parts was perhaps the point of emphasising. So lots of work ongoing in page 68 that's mentioned, and more recently, again, it's highlighted the need for this paper, that lots of things happened last year. As some members will be aware, ISC supported the member promoted issue in walking and cycling on rural roads. It led to a first for the northeast, as far as I'm aware, with the official signing of 3 routes which continue, and they're being kind of monitored. All these routes in particular, like so much of our quieter routes across Shire, had encompassed a notable increase in those walking, cycling and horse riding on it. So it was just to encourage everyone to share, which has become even more paramount with the recent changes to the Highway Code. Moving on from that, Nestrans supported an initiative by Neil Innes, the organiser of Riding North, a legendary cycle sportive in the northeast, with signing of some quiet routes. 140 routes, 2,500 or so signs. Really nice to see and very well supported and met. Importantly, not just by cyclists. In some of the meets that we had with Aberdeenshire Council officers, the likes of economic development, as well as obviously the roads and traffic management teams were involved, but economic development were really helpful, and it kind of promoted the support for local businesses, because we, as cyclists, do like coffee and cake stops, and obviously there was lots of overnight stays and such like as well, so it encouraged the kind of us all to see and experience that's on our doorstep. It then links into both these factors, link into the roads policy review, which is just closed, that Shire have undertaken. And whilst not advocating too many signs all over the place, that we don't want, because too many signs can be a detractor road safety wise, but also aesthetically as well. There are a number of other local cycle networks that up and down the country that do work and kind of showcase our local surroundings. We did a survey which we posted online, and it was met with overwhelming response and some really good insightful pointers from people out there who experienced it. Some that kind of didn't necessarily go treasure hunt, go riding with their kids with them, but some used them as a kind of bit of a treasure hunt. So it was a means to go and visit new and other places that maybe aren't so far from home in so many cases. And the economic benefits were told they were clear for all to see. Moving on from this to kind of build on this, we have included in our bid to Transport Scotland for the coming fiscal year the potential to make it permanent and across the northeast, so that we can create the Grampian Cycle Network or the Northeast Cycle Network. Other names are being floating about there, just so we can make it permanent and encourage and reinforce the need or the importance of more being active in our rural network. And the recommendations there are clear. Yeah, note the ever-changing landscape and really positive landscape that is happening in the northeast. Build on some of the successes that are have happened and are still ongoing in some of the cases, and if board is minded to allow ourselves to continue with local colleagues and others, partners, to perhaps develop this, hopefully, Northeast Cycle Network or words to that effect. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for a very readable and enjoyable report. It did kind of lift spirits, I think. Councillor Argyle, Peter.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And yes, I'd certainly agree with your comment about the report. Both of them, most interesting readings, and thank you for that. Just picking up on the signage one, the one that came out of Neil Innes's proposal. Do we have any data on usage? How many people took advantage of it? The impact that it's had? I mean, I know there's a survey being done, but I think that was separate. But Do we have any data about the impact that it had numerically?
Exact numbers, Councillor, is perfectly hard to imagine. Yeah, the likes of Strava and all the other apps, for those that are self-professed geeks to that, we can see our feeds were filled daily with it. It's hard to gauge exact numbers, but yeah, just because, again, back to, and I'll come on to this in the next paper, the informal nature of walking and cycling makes it really hard to measure accurately who's doing it, unless you kind of tell it, or especially now with social media, you post it somewhere so you can share. What there was, though, and maybe didn't mention it earlier, is with the staycation aspect, there were many who told me that they perhaps live in the Mearns, but they went and stayed an overnight stay in Banffshire, which they've never done in their whole lives, just to experience different routes, follow different signs, whereas they were generally, like most of us, creatures of habit and kind of stuck to their usual patch. So yeah, exact numbers are probably hard to gauge accurately.
Thanks very much. I should have anticipated the word app coming back there. I'm still not entirely sure what one is. Whenever I ask people, say it's an application, which doesn't really help me very much. But I'm not a geek. I'm proud of it. But there you go.
Colin, you wanted to come in.
So yeah, just picking up on Peter's question. There may be more information on what was actually done this year. The Neil's network of routes were also mirrored by a website where everybody was going on and logging what they had done. I think there was one person did them all, which was an incredible amount of miles in the year. So there is a bit more information on that. And then I was kind of that was my question to John. What sort of marketing goes along with this to, you know, develop what Neil had was almost like a little community of people saying, I'm going on this route, and you know, logging it on Strava, and then having everybody comment about the routes and actually you know, generating a bit of buzz around the whole thing. Are we considering that as well?
John?
Totally, yeah. And unusually for me, it was perhaps something that was fairly subtle, that we didn't really, on a grand scale, post and advertise it. Neil obviously did from externally, and a number of other partners, and yeah, it was kind of shared across various social media channels and the press release from ourselves and that as well. But it wasn't really picked up on by, for instance, Visit Aberdeenshire and others, whereas it perhaps I would have hoped it could have been. So the sky's the limit. Perhaps we can certainly do an awful lot more. It was pleasing to see that even with little being done too actively, pardon the pun, to promote it, it still generated a buzz. So that was pleasing to see, perhaps. But yeah, the sky's the limit. I think it could be much more.
I think along with what was there, you know, just having the signposts and coming across the signposts being there was one part of it. Actually having the website saying, right, these are the routes that are out there, and people were going to plan on saying, right, I can do that one to there, that one to the other, was part of the whole the whole of the experience of doing it. Sorry, I don't want to hog everything, but one question. See, you were talking about Transport Scotland and the projects from Active Travel. So what else have we got on from Active Travel just now? Have we got any other bids and something for that?
Yeah, Transport Scotland invited applications from Nestrans and the other RTPs just prior to Christmas for the coming fiscal year. So we took a bid in before the end of January. We've bid for 5 projects, which are continuation of the From Martin and Buchan Way bridge project, which members will be aware of. Will be ongoing for hopefully a long time, because there are lots of bridges needing replacement and repair. There's a continuation in Aberdeenshire of the Core Path Network Survey that we've established in the city this year through Transport Scotland funding and support. but obviously on a much bigger scale across the Shire. The Quiet Route Network, making it permanent, would also be in there as said, and the other two are an adult cycle training, region-wide. Currently, Aberdeenshire, along with Cycling UK, the Aberdeenshire Board, they do provide some adult cycle training in the integrated travel towns, and the Cycle Forum have done a few in the city. The aim with the region-wide cycle training would be to make it, irrespective of where your postcode is, we can get you cycle training to help with for instance, the Scottish Government's access to bikes, which will become national this August, that if the kids are hopefully getting bikes and more training and out and about more, then parents can follow their lead as well. And the last one, just to pick up on something that was mentioned earlier, which is why the active travel stuff that I keep going on about and will continue to keep going on about isn't in isolation. The North East doesn't have a bike recycling or reuse facility. Pretty much most of the country does. So we're behind as far as whilst many garages and sheds and outhouses have lots of bikes being used, which is tremendous, there are equally lots of bikes that aren't being used, and equally there are lots of people that would love to use one but can't get one. So that would be the last one. So there's kind of 5 bids, and we should hopefully hear imminently. Transport Scotland, tell me.
Thank you, John. Thank you.
Thank you. Ian.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just on the share space pilot scheme, I wonder if John's got any feedback on that, or is it too early at the moment? Thank you.
I think it's too early to say. Aberdeenshire Council officers did put in kind of monitoring equipment prior to the signs going in. It is being continually monitored by them and myself, but it's possibly still very early days. As I say, we did expect the highway code changes coming, and we kind of knew them because obviously the consultation last year. So it's all part and parcel of the same thing. And on these 3 routes particular, yes, the continued use by walking, cycling, equestrian use is continuing, but as to what impact and effect it's had in isolation is going to be hard to gauge, because I say there's a highway code changes that have impacted as well, but it certainly will be brought back initially to ISC, obviously, because that's was the initial support for it, and ultimately through ourselves as well. So, but yeah, perhaps just too early to say. It's a bit of a longer term kind of mindset change and maybe behavioural change aspect.
Thank you. Councillor Hutchinson. Michael, you put your hand up. You're still on mute, Michael, if you want to take off your button.
Apologies, I must have double
There
tap.
you go. There, that's fine.
There we go. I was just hoping to pick up on, you mentioned about Visit Aberdeenshire not really picking up the routes that have been run there. I'm just wondering what sort of communication was between yourselves and Visit Aberdeenshire to make them aware of this? Was it a case of we ran it and hoped they'd pick it up, or was it a case of we told them we were doing this and we'd like it advertised and they didn't do that? I was just kind of hoping to find that out in the first instance.
More the latter, Councillor, if I'm honest. However, picking them up by example, it wasn't meant as a criticism, because they're doing so much other good stuff, and it just simply was perhaps missed in it. So it wasn't meant as criticism, far from it. But it was more the latter, but as a sort of approach myself, I'm fortunate to deal with them in a couple of other projects, and through that I included them, but it maybe just wasn't ramped up as ever. I hope for big billboards, and but it maybe didn't showcase. Next year perhaps we could.
I was going to say, if it's going to become a long-standing thing, is it possible to maybe kind of give them another wee nudge towards carrying that, maybe visit Scotland as well, just if they've also got a slightly overlapping remit, just to try and give that some coverage. I think it does look quite a decent offering. I think it's something that we should maybe be. It's nice to see advertised a bit better than maybe what it was, because I think it does deserve that.
Yeah, absolutely. And on that note, we've already got the first of 10 what are colloquially known as Aberdeenshire Ascents in place iconic kind of local climbs, and that will be led by Visit Aberdeenshire through in partnership with NEAT and ourselves and others, that it's kind of promoting what's out there, and obviously this builds up to crescendo for September's Tour of Britain again event. You'd be disappointed if I didn't mention it, and in the lead up to kind of legacy of that, the World Championships in Glasgow in 2023. So there's cycling headlines all over the place. So yeah, so Visit Aberdeenshire are absolutely on board with that, and in fact they've taken the lead, councillor. So so that shows that keep pestering them, and yeah, more good stuff. So
excellent.
Yeah, thank you very much.
And I'm taking it that the cake and the convenience stores and the coffee and so on is marked on the website and so on, so that people can plan around that as well.
It will be, yeah, and I'll certainly volunteer to help with the research of that, Chair.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So if we could, as John mentioned on page 72, two noting recommendations there, then authorising officers to keep on with their liaison with local authority colleagues. If we could agree those, that would be good. Thank you. And then on to your next report, John, on active travel update.
Yeah, ACT Up, yeah, as I say, and I'm not being paid to say this, but ACT Up is a really good document. Rab laughs when I mention that I refer to it regularly. It's really well written and thorough and relevant. It was then, but it remains increasingly so. With obviously the work that members supported with the RTS, it became even more apparent that we need to kind of not a huge fan of the word refresh, because ultimately it could actually be a new ACT Up that we look at. So maybe not necessarily refresh could perhaps send to some out the wrong message that we change the cover and the contents are the same. But so we almost kind of need a root and branch review of ACT Up. In there, as part of that, there were some objectives and indicators. Now they are good, but as I've said earlier, it's really hard when you start walking, cycling data and figures, because of the informal nature and the deliberately informal nature of walking and cycling, to accurately establish what the numbers are. The first objective that you see in the bottom of page 73 is taken from the Scottish Household Survey, and as I've put in there, the kind of dip sample for the North East is 280 people. So how accurate that is questionable. The second indicator is from Nestrans Hands Up survey. As the name would suggest, although it's it is very comprehensive in that nearly all schools take part in it. The kids literally could put their hand up to each question from the teacher. So it is comprehensive, but perhaps maybe less accurate and reliable. However, they are what we have, and again, because they were what we used, we've looked at just initially at where we are with them. And the second objective obviously involves casualties. Now, this is obviously clearly very stark, and although it does show in the main there is a decline, which is good, but each and every one of those numbers refers to someone being obviously killed, seriously injured or injured. So we're conscious that they aren't just figures. So whilst it looks pleasing that they are on the decline, as general road casualty figures are, it is tempered with still we need to do more. ACT Up has obviously got a number of different areas again in it that are all still as relevant as they were then, and increasingly so. And the proposed next steps are to, as I say, do a kind of a thorough review of ACT Up, where we've got to, and what we think we need to do next, and make sure the kind of priorities are. So the recommendations for board are note where we've got to and where we are, and then instruct a kind of more comprehensive review of what we need to do next.
Thanks very much for that. And just a comment for myself, I think I've always been a little frustrated about the data that we get around this, if I'm honest, and even the Hands Up survey, it has to be all collected, then it goes into the centre, and then we don't you know, as a city, we don't see it until you know, the kids have grown another 3 inches and you know, are onto a different bike. So, you know, whilst I'm looking at this, you know, it's 2019 data, and we're in 2022, and we've had a pandemic in the middle, and so I understand your frustration. I could hear creeping in a little there about the data, but any other questions or comments? Colin.
You could have guessed I was going to ask some questions, right? Yeah, just so that the 2014 to 2035, so we're kind of about a third, just over a third through it. When back in 2014 in our targets, how do we think we've done? You know, what have we done? What have we not done? Are there any big hitters that you think we're really going to get after?
I suppose the report card would read good, but could do more and could do better. So maybe a B plus or B minus or thereabouts. In amongst the actions, I suppose selfishly the wisest move that Nestrans have made. One of the actions was appointing a then described as a cycling development officer. So the post I'm fortunate to occupy and annoy my colleagues with was one of those. So the very fact that it started as a plan, we need someone. So yes, and that's now, you know, so the predecessors to myself. So that's the first one. Although there are 46 actions and 6 are only currently shown as completed, that in itself, I don't want to be too hard on that trap and its intentions when I say that, because at face value 6 out of 46, you think, well, if a third of the way, we should be further along. Quite a number of the actions are long-term actions by themselves. As members will be aware, for infrastructure, there is a stag process to go through. By its very nature, it does take time, more than any of us would like. The shorter term actions have included things like that I've completed is the hard standing hard surface on the F&B way in the city extent. There was the Ellen to Merker path that's been established, the Riverside path near the Bridge D. Peterhead was a pioneer as far as the cycling demonstration town improvements. Although that task is physically completed, there's still more happening on top of what was originally kind of sought out. Nearly all the actions, if not all the actions, are actually ongoing in some shape or form. But given the fact there are 46, they're all very thorough. Very few of them are in isolation. The impact in 2 or 3 places for specifics. There's lots happening. So, but again, yeah, in summation, good, but could do more.
Thank you.
Thanks, John. Anything else from you, Colin? I'm not seeing any other hands up. As John mentioned, can we note the progress and commend officers to go forward with the comprehensive root and branch review as mentioned? Excellent. Thanks, members. Okay, if we could move on then to our progress report, and any questions or queries on that is for information and questions. Not seeing anyone. Perhaps we'll just then go on to the publications and consultations and ask Paul to talk us through those. Thanks, Paul.
Thanks very much, Chair. Yeah, so we split the publications and consultations into 2 reports. The first report, 8.1, talks about 3 national strategic documents which have been published in the new year or just before the new year. I guess possibly the best thing to do is just to take them one at a time. There's the Strategic Transport Projects Review. There was a publication on the 20% reduction in car vehicle kilometres. And then there was the National Planning Framework 4 as well. So they're the 3 quite meaty publications for this. So perhaps I'll take them one at a time. I can take questions after each of them. So the first,
that would be super. Thanks.
The first one is Strategic Transport Projects Review 2. It was published on the 21st of January in Holyrood by Mr. Matheson. It basically provides recommendations of nationally important projects to be taken forward for the consideration of subsequent transport ministers for their budgetary considerations and inclusion in the infrastructure plan. It's a 20-year plan, so there's no guarantee that all these things will be taken forward in year one, but part of that sort of a 20-year phase going forward. Over the last 2 or 3 years, we've come back to this board with updates on how this process is going and how our regional transport strategy and how the strategic transport appraisal has also fed into this work. There's been a regional working group which officers have contributed to, and there's also been a national working group of various types which again officers have fed into. The Appendix A lists 45 of the proposals that have been recommended. Of those that are included of relevance to the North East of Scotland are the previously announced proposals for Aberdeen Rapid Transit and bus priority measures, which are currently ongoing. There's a whole swathe of interventions around active travel, including active travel freeways, which have been recommended for Aberdeen. There's elements about railway station physical accessibility, which links quite nicely into the work we've previously done at Inch, recently submitted to Transport Scotland. The rail link between Aberdeen and Central Belts is included within this, and actually there are indications of going beyond that in subsequent stages over the longer term. There's quite a lot of detail on ferry elements. And the Northlink ferry terminal at Aberdeen is concluded within that. And then there's a whole basket of nationwide interventions. Often reading as policy interventions, it's hard to work out what the particular scheme is, but they go across from active travel at schools to road safety interventions to intelligent transport systems on the trunk road network. It's noted that the A96 Aberdeen to Inverness isn't particularly covered, but they say because of a previous announcement between SNP and the Greens that there'd be a review of that, and they've outlined how that review would be taken forward. Other regional schemes that had been considered committed continued to be considered to be committed, such as Lawrencekirk and the programme of improvements to access Aberdeen South Harbour. Some elements that we might have liked to have seen in here, but are perhaps ambiguous. Ambiguous is proposals for local rail between, or improvement of local rail between Montrose and Inverurie, including local rail stations. There's not a specific improvement programme for subsequent phases of Aberdeen to Inverness rail. The trunk road north between Ellen to Peterhead and Fraserburgh is absent as well, although potentially covered by more generic improvements to trunk road reliability and junctions. Longer term improvements on the A92 and the A90 South again is not specifically mentioned. The previous Strategic Transport Projects Review, STPR 1, had a park and ride proposal in the south, and that's not specifically mentioned. And there's no mention of Dice to Ellen Rail, not that we were explicitly promoting it in our regional transport strategy, but again, it is not mentioned at all. The consultation responses that I've worked up is provided in Appendix B, and I guess some of the elements there that we're pulling out is just some unclarity about the delivery frameworks going forward, lack of specific detail on quite a number of the projects, and things like the cost of transport and the affordability of transport, which are also really important considerations for what the requirements for transport are in the next 20 years. Again, that's been scoped out of consideration for this, which again seems a bit of a difficulty for where we're at the moment. So I'll stop there, and perhaps I can take questions or any comments on the consultation response that I prepared.
Thanks very much, Paul. Philip, you've got a question or a comment?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Paul. very thorough report as usual. I noticed in Appendix D there's industrial green transition zones in Fergus. So is that actually going to link in with the Acorn project? Is that its specific, the context, as it were?
Yeah, that will probably come under NPF4, so I might come back to that one in a bit, Councillor Bell, but again, it's a relevant point because that is included there. I understand it is linked to that Acorn project, and again, it does introduce, to my mind, the importance of that north, the transport link north of Aberdeen up to Peterhead, Fraserburgh and St Fergus in that context.
Okay, thanks.
Peter, you were next, I think, and then followed by Colin.
Yeah, thanks. Firstly, a comment. The A90, it's clearly disappointing that amongst trunk roads that's not picked up. It doesn't fill me with any confidence it's likely to be picked up, and that's depressing, I have to say. The other one, you're probably not surprised, I'm going to talk about Inch, which is something we've been very committed to as an organisation. I think the last response we had, possibly through the media rather than directly, was that the next step was for Inch to be included in the STPR2. It hasn't been, except in a very broad generic sense. The consultation doesn't really give an opportunity. It's a very odd, the way that the consultation itself has been written, doesn't really give an opportunity to flag that. But Paul, unless I've missed it, is there more we can put into the response about Inch? Because, you know, we have done everything that we possibly can at this end to address the issues at Inch, which is the most disadvantaged railway station in Scotland in terms of all abilities access. We were told by Transport Scotland that STPR2 was the next big step for that project. It's not in. And we really must say it has to be in, it has to be mentioned specifically. Whatever other regions feel about stations in their areas, Inch is recognised as being the most challenging. So any thoughts on that? Thank you.
Again, I think there is potentially three opportunities. So one opportunity is to strengthen a couple of those free text elements that are in the consultation Appendix B. The second one is obviously to perhaps preface our comments on STPR2 with a covering letter, and perhaps thirdly as well, just to say we are having ongoing conversations with Transport Scotland officers. So again, perhaps that's another third way, perhaps more in a softer way of getting the message across, as well as the harder and the more formal way. So I think all approaches are relevant and appropriate. And perhaps that comment about that overarching covering letter might be appropriate to take forward, just to highlight the regional case for the work that we have done in that area, and say under that particular intervention, stressing how important it is to not only look after the urban areas of Scotland, but also the more disadvantaged areas of Inch, recognising the large rural catchment of that particular station.
Yes, so under number 19, where it says infrastructure to improve access for all at railway stations. So maybe under question 21, maybe just to put something in there, Paul would cover that off. Colin.
No. Sorry, can I just quickly, Sandra, forgive me. No, Paul, that's great. If we can do all three of those, that I think would be excellent. Of course, both of these projects, a considerable amount of local money has been spent on preparation and thought and work, and the A90 particularly, we spent a lot of money looking at the options and possibilities there, and unless we get some action soon, that money might as well just be thrown away. It'll be the work will be out of date, and we'll have to go back to the beginning and start again, and then we'll be told, well, you can't have a new road anyway. But it really does need, both of them somehow need to be worked into the response. The A90 is, I accept that, but the station specifically. Thanks.
And particularly the toll of Burness in there, I would imagine that could be picked up on the safety element as well.
Yeah.
Colin.
Yeah, it's good to go.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. And I thought your responses were really good. So what I just want to know, you know, especially about the whole missing part of the A19 North from my point of view for that. But well, what's the sort of timescales on this for responses to the consultation, and you know, how do we think, would we get a sort of northeast appendix to say these things are under, you know, not in the national document, but they're under a regional part of the document? Could you have appendix for each area in Scotland? Because I imagine other areas have got the same issues in their, you know, when they're going to their meetings and fizzing about it.
So they have developed, and on the website, Colin, and perhaps afterwards I might point you in the direction of that one. They've actually, because they've built it up both from a top down and a bottom up process, they did look quite significantly at the whole range of issues in and around the regional actions. We had a whole load of regional working groups promoting these things, and there's actually some regional documentations that, you know, make the case for these particular areas. And indeed, the regional transport strategy and our STA included these and promoted these as we go on. Ultimately, Transport Scotland, I think I've said in a comment, have taken a national view of what regional priorities are rather than taking what regional views are on face value. So perhaps that's something there. So the documentation, the evidence is there. I guess what we need to do is just continue to make our case for these elements, particularly in some of these perhaps more generic, broad schemes where they say, oh, we'll continue to work on trunk road reliability and safety without being specific at all about where that happens. And I think that's an opportunity where we can strongly make our case and say, well, what about the North East? How does this work? You know, you're spending all this money on fancy integrated intelligent transport systems, often benefiting the central belt motorways, but what about the North East trunk roads? How does that all work out? And not forgetting the importance of active travel linkages along these routes as well, and public transport and linkages into Ellen Park and Ryde, for example. So it's that integrated solution that we're looking for.
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks. Do you want to go on to the second element on the 20%?
Yeah, so the other public, the second of the three publications that came out recently was a framework for 20% vehicle reduction. This was the last board we spoke a little bit about this. I remember some of the research, background research was published. Well, the actual framework came out in early January as well, relating to the Scottish Climate Change Plan. 29% of Scottish greenhouse gas emissions after transport, 38% of which are often the private car. So it's definitely framed within that decarbonisation piece. They realise that the transfer to low emission vehicles would not be sufficient. So they're looking at both how we can encourage less private vehicle usage and have a strategy to do that about reducing the need to travel, living well locally, which is perhaps shorter journeys, which are more easily accommodated by sustainable means or shorter trips, switching modes, and combining trips where possible. And again, those four themes will be familiar, particularly for Aberdeenshire councillors, because they very much fit with the themes that have been replicated for a number of years within their local transport strategy. They have also been replicated as well in the Aberdeen Cities one, but perhaps just not quite as explicitly of that one. So there was a consultation on this. And again, I think Appendix C, I've set out what the proposed consultation response would be, and I think we welcome it, and we think it's very much in line from all the things that we've been talking about today about the active travel, about how we can encourage that more sustainable behaviours. But there seem to be some missing elements in this work. They haven't really framed it within that decarbonisation piece. They haven't necessarily talked about what other measures would be necessary to achieve that change, if that's what they're going for, as well. And perhaps some of the urgency that was expressed in some of the research doesn't seem to have carried through into this document that's been published. So perhaps there are the 3 or 4 main points that I've tried to draw out in that consultation response. But again, if any has any observations on that consultation response or even on the document, happy to take them into account now.
Anything on that Appendix C? It's on 144 to 146, members.
Nope.
If we go on to the National Planning Framework 4, then Paul.
Okay, again, finally, again, for those who are sitting on national, who also sit on planning committees, they will be very familiar with this that's come out with. Some elements of it do relate to the transport and infrastructure side of things. And I've tried to pull those out in this paper just to give that a little bit of a spotlight in the context of Nestrans. There's a spatial strategy that they've published, which does include, again, the Aberdeen Rapid Transit proposals. So that's nice to see. They do recognise the strategic links. And again, they do have reference to the importance of active travel, public transport and digital connectivity. So again, that's pleasing to see. What is absent, there's no real mention of the airport, which is a surprise. But the other one, again, is the Trunk Road link north Aberdeen to Peterhead. Fraserburgh is also not recognised. And again, if I could pick up on Councillor Bell's point that they've indicated a national development in and around St Fergus area. And again, that just seems slightly disjointed in that respect. There's quite a big policy push on what they're calling 20-minute neighbourhoods, this living well locally. Again, it ties in, again, across the piece that we've been looking at this policy. Again, perhaps there needs to be a bit more thought about what this means in a northeast context. I think they've developed the policy possibly more from a larger urban area where, and again, I haven't put much context into how we might retrofit this sort of policy, because it is more than just footpaths and cycleways. It's about those communities. It's about that strength of local vitality, I guess, in these areas as well, and those facilities that actually want to keep people local, use the coffee shops and cake shops, which John will be supporting, and also avoiding some of these out-of-town developments, perhaps if that is required by car to get to. That seems to be the policy direction as well. There's also some policy around infrastructure first, which again is continuation, but not much on a proposed infrastructure levy, which was included in the Enabling Act. And again, there's a whole tranche of policies on sustainable travel and transport, which again generally mirror what is established, generally are welcomed, but say the issue around cumulative impacts of significant generating developments, which might arise over time but be distant from the exact proximity. Again, they haven't really picked up on that one, which does have some relevance to that A90 Ellen corridor in terms of some development, say in Peterhead might be affecting roundabouts in Ellen, and again trying to provide the case for that in terms of development contributions can be challenging in that situation. So a fly through from a transport planner's perspective of MPF4, and I know that there are planners as well around who may have more detailed comments on there, but again, we've provided to try to propose on a transport specific basis those comments.
Yeah, thank you. And I take your point about 20-minute neighbourhoods in Paris are not quite the same as 20-minute neighbourhoods perhaps in Peterhead or other places. I guess the one thing that's not in there for me or you know, worth kind of just mentioning was having picked up in the press and having been mentioned it in planning terms for quite a while now is the use of drones and how that can reduce people having to, you know, get goods and services quickly to places, is something that Angus is now pioneering just south of us, and so it would be good to keep a weather eye on what they're doing. Peter, do you want to come in and make a comment or ask a question?
Yeah, just very briefly, actually, I think it's a really good paper, good, very happy with that. It's a very complex piece of work, it has to be said, and we've spent quite a lot of time in Aberdeenshire. We've had 3, if not 4 workshops, I've lost track, looking at the different aspects of it, and that's all getting fed together and putting together the council's response, which will be fairly voluminous, I suspect. a lot to say. I do agree, I have to say, in passing with your comment, which the chair has already picked up around the 20-minute neighbourhoods. It's a very city-centric concept. I struggle to see how that is really going to work in rural parts of Aberdeenshire. But it's been raised, and no doubt we'll get a response back through our council response. It's not really relevant for Nestrans, I think. But thanks very much, Paul. Thanks.
Just picking up on a point as well, Paul, that Philip made earlier. You might want to address that, and then we'll bring in Maggie, if that's appropriate. If you could remember it around that.
I think I did pick that one up actually, Chair, and I did confirm that site in St Fergus, I understand, was associated with that carbon capture project.
Okay.
Although that broad proposal's around there, so yes, I do believe that that's the instance of what that is.
Good, Maggie.
Yeah, thank you. Probably not going to be surprised that I had a few things to say about this, but focusing just on the transport stuff, trying to focus just on the transport stuff, the whole concept of the kind of action areas. I think Paul points out in his paper that there are actions within other regions that apply equally to the northeast, and there's probably stuff in the northeast that applies equally to other areas. And I think the whole action area thing, whilst I can see what the Scottish Government were trying to do, probably hasn't been as successful as they might have hoped, in that it kind of loses a bit of regional identity by trying to lump too many things together. So I think the point about, the stuff that's included, it's a very technical term, under each of the different action areas isn't necessarily correct, is a point worth making. And I suppose I'm particularly concerned about things like that, and some of the things that Paul has pointed out haven't been addressed are significant this time round because it's going to have much more status. The MPF4 is going to be part of the development plan, so it will be important in determining planning applications in the way that the existing MPF wasn't. This is replacing Scottish planning policy, so we need to make sure that the policies that are in it actually work for us, not just in transport terms, but also in terms of how the transport policies relate to other non-transport policies. I think there's a lot of policies in there, and that means a lot of them are quite contradictory. So they seem to be pulling against each other. So I think, I suppose I'm just supporting what Paul's saying in this, but emphasising the importance of needing to get this right, given that it will be part of the development plan. It has much more important status. In terms of things like the airport being missing, all of the airports are missing, because last time it was kind of strategic enhancements to the airports were included as national developments. I've had a bit of a kind of musing over this as to whether or not, because we've been trying to make the proposed spaceports national developments, and there's a bit of me that thinks, well, does it really matter? Because actually being a national development doesn't make any real difference. We go through the same process. So I suppose we just have to decide how hard we want to fight that battle, and if it's one worth fighting relative to some of the other battles we might want to fight. Sorry, it's a bit of a ramble.
Okay, useful points. Thanks very much for that. And just to say that when I've developed this and I continue in the dialogue with the local authority planning context, to contacts I have both in the city and in the Shire, and just and the remnants of the SDPA as well, just to try and keep that narrative together as well.
Thanks, members. That was very helpful. So it's three noting of those publications. If we could agree that that would be splendid. And then on to the second part of the publications. We've got Kelly Wiltshire's going to take us through that. Thank you, Kelly.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm just going to go through a few other consultations that have come through recently, and some more publications that perhaps aren't quite as big and strategic as others, but are still nonetheless important and worth members being aware of. The first is around the ScotRail Ticket Office consultation. This is the first big consultation that ScotRail have done on their ticketing office hours for over 30 years. They are very keen to point out that no staff are going to lose their jobs, everyone will be redeployed, and that a total of 3 ticket offices across Scotland are proposed to close, but none of those are actually in the northeast of Scotland. And all facilities will remain, such as ticket vending machines, help points, and 24-hour CCTV. In terms of the Nestrans area, there are ticket offices, as you'll be aware, in Stonehaven, Aberdeen, Inverurie and Huntly. I've got just below there what the current proposals are. Aberdeen and Inverurie hours are proposed to remain the same as what they currently are. There are changes for Huntly and Stonehaven. Stonehaven, this reflects quite closely to what's happening in other stations across the country, reducing hours slightly, Friday hours being slightly longer, and Saturday, because they're looking at the way that people are now travelling on trains, that Fridays and Saturdays seem to be busier days than Monday to Thursday. One of the things that we felt was slightly out of sync with the rest of the country and the other proposals was around Huntly and their proposed hours on Friday, which is actually quite a significant reduction. So I have pulled together a response for ScotRail, basically highlighting this and saying, you know, that we could understand why they were doing it for the other stations, but certainly we had some concerns about the reduction of hours in Huntly. We've already submitted the consultation response because unfortunately it was only a 21-day consultation, so it would have closed by the time it came to board today, but it was sent past the chair and vice chairs before we went it, and before I sent it, and the full response is available in Appendix 1. I also raised the point about some tickets are currently only available via ticket offices and staff, and whether they would then be available at ticket machines, such as Kid for a Quid tickets, since there would be less opportunity for people to buy them from members of staff in the future. Another publication that has come out recently is the Scotland's Draft Hydrogen Action Plan. It was published in November 2021, but we didn't mention it in the December board, unfortunately. So it's just really to give you an update that this draft action plan is now out and is available, and there's a link to it in the document, and is just giving a 5-year plan on what the Scottish Government's plans are in regard to reducing greenhouse gas emissions and hydrogen. The next one is a consultation. Now, this isn't due till April, but it was just more to give the board a heads up, and I'm currently reviewing the proposals and preparing a response, which of course we'll send round the board before we send back to them. It's in regard to the public sector equality duty. We are currently subject to this duty, and we do a mainstreaming and outcomes report. The last one went to board in April last year, and again there's a link to it. Now that looks at Nestrans as an organisation, so in terms of our staff and what we are doing in our policies, but it also looks at Nestrans as a board, so looking at what the gender makeup is of the board and so on as well. We've also looked at our equality duties in terms of our regional transport strategy, and we did an equalities impact assessment as part of the development of our regional transport strategy. So we'll be looking at all of these things whilst compiling our response for this consultation. We've also got a draft vision for electric vehicles, in particular around electric vehicle charging. We've obviously already had quite a conversation already around electrical vehicle charging during this board, but it was just to highlight that the draft vision is now published. There's a link to it here, and it's just looking at how it fits in with the other policies, like what Paul was saying earlier about reducing car kilometres travelled, the changes in how people are using electric charging points, how more people are now using them. We've got more charging points than ever. We're likely to see an increase even further, and also the number of people actually purchasing electric vehicles has increased dramatically, particularly even just in the last few months. 21% of all new car sales in Scotland in December were electric vehicles. So clearly it's something that is very relevant and will be increasingly relevant to us all. And just for the board to note the recommendations. And if anybody's got any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Thank you very much, Kelly. Questions, comments from members? Just on that last point, is the increase in December of 21%, is that fully electric cars or is that hybrid cars?
That's fully electric. Hybrid was also included separate, and we can send you the information. It's published every month, and certainly the last few months has seen a large increase in the amount of hybrid, full electric, and huge reductions, particularly in diesel cars.
Thanks. Peter.
I think I appreciate the consultation response has gone on the ticket office, and I'm trying to remember what we said because so much stuff's happening at the moment. But clearly it was signed off and sent. Just thinking about the Huntley Friday piece, opening a ticket office for an hour and a half in the course of a day seems an odd proceeding. Did ScotRail give any indication as to the reason for that? Is that just when there happen to be passengers around, or when they want passengers to be around, or it just seems very odd to go to the trouble of opening a booking office for a whole of an hour and a half?
Yeah, they sent us a spreadsheet of all the stations and when their busy periods were. So basically the number of tickets that were sold in their ticket offices per hour across the day, and they've made their decisions on the basis of when were the really quiet hours and when were the busiest hours, and they've obviously decided that in Huntley those were the hours that were the busiest, so were the ones that were worth opening. We did feel that it was a slight anomaly, which is why we've raised the Huntley issues. We did think 5 hours less was quite a significant reduction compared to other places on a Friday, but certainly ScotRail have tried to justify it, and they have done some, I'll give them their due, they have actually compiled a lot of information and haven't just plucked, figures out of the air and hours out of the air. They have actually have some sense around it, and they've looked at what the data is showing them, and then they've made a decision.
Okay, I thought that must be the case. It seems almost such a precise opening hour that it must have been based on something, but hey ho, everything will be done by machine. We won't have people doing anything in a few more years.
Thanks, thanks, Kelly. So no more hands, board members. So noting the publications that we had, the 4 publications we had, or consultations we had in front of us, a mixture of, but also on number 3, to instruct officers to prepare a response. Are we happy to do that? Excellent, thank you. And on to the last lap, RAB, we've got the information bulletin, conferences and presentations, and then pending business.
Thanks, Chair. Start with the information bulletin. A few items there for noting. I'll highlight a couple for members' information, if I may. One relating to a project that we have done in partnership with Police Scotland, handing out cycle lights to people who were cycling at dusk or in the darker evenings without bike lights. And Police Scotland were quite happy to approach these people, and rather than getting heavy-handed with them, offering them bike lights, which were provided and supplied by Nestrans. It's a fairly successful scheme, we feel. 110 sets of lights were given out, and a little graph there of where the locations of these were, and you can see very much a spread across both Aberdeen and Aberdeenshire. ScotRail are heading towards significant change as they come into public ownership, but there's also a change proposed to the timetables. There's been some publicity about this nationally. basically, again, based on real statistical data that they're working out where trains are busiest and where they're least busy. There are some significant changes being proposed from, I think it's the May 24 timetable, but the changes are not significant in the northeast of Scotland. There are changes in the west and in Fife, which I'm sure there will be publicity around before that comes to pass. Progress on the Bus Partnership Fund bid, and we would intend to bring back a fuller report to the next meeting, particularly around the Aberdeen Rapid Transit proposals. An update on Getabout and Appendix 1 providing a media summary. We should note maybe that the media summary is very much focused on the print media. We do also do a significant amount of social media information going out on both Facebook and other social media aspects. And also that on the back of some of these press releases, there was requests for statements from the chair. I think both Original Radio and STV did interviews around STPR2. So quite a lot happening on the media side. The board are asked to note the report. It's there for members' information. But if there are any questions, happy to take them.
Any questions on item 9 on our agenda and information bulletin? No. Conferences and presentations, Rab.
Thanks, Chair. Again, just to note, it's been quite a quiet period in terms of conferences, and the 3 that are mentioned there have no budget implications, so they're just for members' information.
Thanks, Rab. And then on to our pending business and future meetings report.
Thanks, Chair. As members will be aware, the next meeting of the board will be the last meeting of the current board, and we will bring forward to that meeting an annual report, which is slightly earlier than we normally do, but we thought it was appropriate to come to the current board rather than going to the next one. As part of that, we'll try to include a 5-year review, basically an end of term summary for to indicate some of the progress that's happened over the period of the current board. I've mentioned that ART, we will bring a fuller report to the next meeting, Aberdeen Rapid Transit, and I think that's the key summary, is key points from that.
Thanks. And can I ask about where we might meet in April? Because I think we are moving more to perhaps moving more to meeting up in person, Rab?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, arrangements have been put in place. There are room bookings at Woodhill House. If the board are so minded, we could certainly aim to have that as a meeting in person. I understand that the technology is available, that could be a hybrid meeting whereby members who feel more comfortable dialing in, or officers, if there's a limit on the number of people that should be in the room, could support the meeting virtually. But yeah, the way the current guidance is 1 metre distancing, it's looking like it would be possible to have the next meeting in a more conventional fashion in probably Committee Room 5 in Woodhill House, if you and the board are so minded to do.
Yep, that would certainly chime with how I'm feeling at the moment about coming together for a meeting. Peter?
Yeah, I'd certainly support that. Committee Room 5, I have to say from experience of the one before last, we had to stop because of the omnibus variant that came along, but we'd started going to hybrid meetings, and Committee Room 5 works well, and further work has been done on particularly the AV side of it. The IT is okay. It should work well. I would totally support it. We'll need to know in advance how many people would want to attend in person and so on, but that's detail. I have to say, yesterday I was at an in-person meeting of the One Board and the Northeast Regional, the Regional Forum, Economic Forum, and it was so nice to be back amongst people again. I cannot tell you, you know, colleagues that I'm looking at you now, folk I've been looking at on a computer screen for very nearly 2 years, and to actually be back in the same room and to be with people again, it is fantastic. So yes, please, let's make the next one for real, and then for those of us who are around after May, let's try and keep it real forevermore.
Yeah.
Chair, if I may, I think one of the benefits of having met virtually is that we do record the meetings and they are put on the Nestrans website. And I'm hopeful that it might be possible once we are back to meeting virtually or hybrid, that it might be possible to record the meeting in some way and to keep that that new tradition that we have of board meetings being available to view. And I know council meetings, for example, are available after the event. And if members feel that that would be worthwhile, it would certainly be something we could look into.
Certainly, all of our committee meetings are recorded. I think we're just trying to get the cameras to work again properly, so to work with the microphones, but they're all recorded. We had a area committee meeting yesterday, and the recording's available for anyone who is sufficiently interested to go and listen to it.
Well, that's what I would want to see as well, would be how many people actually click to watch some of these things. So you know, if we could get some of that data as well to augment doing it, I think it would be worth doing. But if, you know, if members of the public or journalists or whoever are not so interested, it would be good to know what sort of traffic there is on either council meetings or Nestrans meetings, and take it from there. But yeah, in principle, I think it's a good idea to get those, you know, have them available after the meeting, because not everybody can come along at 2 o'clock on a Wednesday to do so, and might be interested in what we have to say. So on that note, thank you very much for your attendance today. Hopefully we will see you on 20th of April in person. Those that can make it, if not, stay safe, cycle safe, walk safe, and we'll see you all in April. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Andrew. See you later.